The empty crib had been waiting for 15 years, and Claire Voss was running out of hope. No amount of her $12 billion could fix what was broken inside her body. At 42, after countless failed treatments and shattered dreams, she made a decision that would shock the world. She approached Daniel Reed, a homeless man living beneath the Riverside Bridge, with an offer that seemed impossible to refuse. Daniel wasn't chosen for his appearance or his past. He was a former music teacher who lost everything when his wife died in a car accident. But there was something in his gentle spirit that made Claire believe he possessed what money couldn't buy. Their agreement was simple. Their baby daughter arrived 9 months later, healthy and perfect. Claire expected their arrangement to end quietly. Instead, when she saw Daniel holding their child, she discovered something that would change everything she thought she knew about being a parent. What happens when a billionaire realizes the homeless man she hired might be the better father? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Claire Voss stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse office, watching the city stretch endlessly below her. 42 floors up, the people looked like ants, their problems distant and manageable. If only her own life felt that controllable. The irony wasn't lost on her. She commanded a tech empire worth $12 billion, employed over 30,000 people across 4 continents, and had revolutionized cloud computing with innovations that changed how the world stored and accessed information. Yet she couldn't solve the one problem that mattered most. The medical file sat heavy in her hands, its thickness a testament to 15 years of hope and heartbreak. Dr. Martinez had been gentle but clear during their last appointment. Claire, we've exhausted every option. The scarring from the endometriosis is too extensive. Your body simply can't sustain a pregnancy. The words echoed in her mind as she flipped through page after page of failed procedures, negative blood tests, and carefully worded explanations of why her body refused to cooperate with her deepest desire. Ms. Voss? Sarah Chun, her assistant of 8 years, knocked softly on the office door. The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Claire closed the file and slipped it into her desk drawer, next to the ultrasound photos that would never exist. Tell them I'll be right there. The boardroom buzzed with the usual energy of powerful men and women discussing quarterly projections and market expansion. Claire took her seat at the head of the mahogany table, her expression composed and authoritative. For the next 2 hours, she guided discussions about acquisitions, listened to reports about competitor analysis, and made decisions that would affect thousands of jobs and millions in revenue. No one in that room would have guessed that their CEO's heart was breaking, that she went home each night to a mansion filled with empty rooms and hollow silence. Marcus Fitzgerald, a lawyer and longtime friend, lingered after the others left. You look tired, Claire. Really tired. She gathered her papers, avoiding his concerned gaze. Just the usual pressures of running a company. This isn't about the company. Marcus had known her since law school, back when she was driven but still laughed easily. You've been different these past few months. More distant, more what, Marcus? More desperate. The word hung between them like an accusation. Claire set down her pen and finally met his eyes. What if I told you I was considering something unconventional? Something that might solve my problem but could create others? Marcus leaned forward, his expression shifting to professional concern. I'd say that as your lawyer and your friend, I want to know what you're thinking before you do something that could destroy everything you've built. But Claire was already walking toward the door, her mind made up in a way that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. 20 miles. Across the city, beneath the concrete arches of the Riverside Bridge, Daniel Reed was sharing his dinner with a stray cat. The orange tabby had appeared 3 weeks ago, skinny and wary, but Daniel's patient offerings of food scraps had earned a cautious trust. Tonight, he broke his piece of bread donated by the church group that came by Tuesdays into careful portions. "There you go, girl," he murmured, watching the cat devour her share with delicate hunger. "We all deserve to eat." The bridge provided decent shelter from rain, though the February wind still cut through the layers of clothing Daniel had collected over his 2 years on the streets. He'd arranged cardboard and an old sleeping bag into something resembling comfort, with a plastic crate serving as both table and storage for his few possessions. Among them, carefully wrapped in a garbage bag, was his most treasured item, a book of piano compositions by Chopin, its pages yellowed and edges worn soft from years of handling. Daniel opened the book by the light of a nearby street lamp, his fingers tracing the musical notes he could no longer play. Once, he'd stood before a classroom of eager teenagers, teaching them to find beauty in Bach and passion in Beethoven. Once, he'd come home to Maria's smile and the smell of her cooking, to a small house filled with music and laughter and dreams of the children they'd planned to have. The car accident had taken Maria on a rainy Thursday evening in October. The grief that followed had consumed everything else: his job when he couldn't focus on teaching, his house when he couldn't make the mortgage payments, his will to rebuild when the weight of loss felt too heavy to carry. Drinking had seemed like a solution until it became another problem. When he finally got sober, he was living in a shelter, and the world had moved on without him. "Evening, Professor." Daniel looked up to see Tommy Martinez, a young man who'd been on the streets longer than Daniel, but carried himself with protective swagger. Despite his tough exterior, Tommy had appointed himself as something of a guardian for the older, more vulnerable residents of their makeshift community. "Tommy, how was your day?" "Same old. You know how it is." Tommy settled onto a nearby crate, producing a cigarette from somewhere in his jacket. "Heard there's gonna be rain tomorrow." "Heavy stuff." Daniel nodded, already mentally preparing for another day of staying dry and warm. "We'll manage." "We always do." "You ever think about getting out of here, Professor? I mean, really getting out?" The question was one Daniel had stopped asking himself months ago. Getting out required resources, connections, hope, things that felt as foreign as the life he'd once lived. "Where would I go, Tommy? What would I do?" "I don't know, man, but you're different from the rest of us. You still got something." Tommy gestured vaguely at the music book in Daniel's hands. "You still got something beautiful left in you." Daniel closed the book carefully, wrapping it back in its protective plastic. Beautiful things were fragile. He'd learned that lesson too well. But as he settled into his sleeping bag, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and Tommy's quiet humming, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting in the air. Change was coming, though he couldn't imagine what form it might take. In her penthouse that same night, Claire stood in the doorway of what should have been a nursery. She'd had it designed 5 years ago, during a particularly hopeful phase of fertility treatments. The walls were painted a soft yellow, gender neutral. The designer had explained, with hand-painted trees and friendly animals that would never watch over a sleeping child. The crib, crafted from sustainable bamboo by an artisan in Vermont, sat empty except for the stuffed elephant she'd bought on impulse and immediately regretted. Sarah found her there an hour later, having used her key when Claire didn't answer the phone. "You missed the dinner with the Japanese investors," Sarah said gently. Claire didn't turn around. "Make my apologies. Reschedule for next week." "Claire, what's going on? This isn't like you." Finally, Claire faced her assistant, the closest thing she had to a friend, despite the professional boundaries they maintained. "Sarah, can I ask you something? What makes someone a good parent?" The question clearly caught Sarah off guard. At 31, she was married with 2 young children who occasionally appeared in office video calls, filling the screen with gap-toothed grins and excited chatter about school projects. Well, love, I suppose. Patience. The willingness to To put someone else's needs before your own. What about money? Security? The ability to provide opportunities? Those help, certainly. But they're not the most important things. Sarah stepped into the room, her voice careful. Why are you asking? Claire walked to the crib, running her hand along its smooth rail. Because I've been thinking about what I'm willing to do to become a mother, and I'm not sure I like the answer. The idea had been forming for weeks, born from late-night internet searches about surrogacy laws and alternative family arrangements. Traditional surrogacy was complicated by her medical condition and the legal gray areas that came with paying someone to carry a child. But what if the arrangement was simpler? What if she found someone willing to father a child naturally, with clear legal boundaries and financial compensation? The thought was radical, potentially scandalous, and completely unlike anything the cautious, calculating Claire Voss would normally consider. Which was exactly why she couldn't stop thinking about it. There's something I need to do, she told Sarah. Something that might seem unusual. How unusual are we talking? Claire looked out the window at the city lights, each one representing a life, a story, a person with their own struggles and dreams. Somewhere out there was someone who might understand desperation, someone who might say yes to an impossible question. The kind that changes everything. Claire had never been to this part of the city. Her driver, James, kept glancing in the rearview mirror as they navigated streets lined with abandoned warehouses and chain-link fences topped with razor wire. The GPS indicated they were still 3 blocks from Riverside Bridge, but Claire had asked him to stop here, unwilling to arrive in a vehicle that cost more than most people's annual salary. Ma'am, are you certain about this? James's voice carried the protective concern of someone who'd worked for the Voss family for over a decade. This isn't exactly a safe neighborhood. Claire adjusted her deliberately modest clothing jeans and a plain sweater she'd bought that afternoon, still feeling costume-like in their unfamiliarity. I'll be fine, James. Give me 2 hours. She walked the remaining distance, her anxiety building with each step. The research had taken weeks. Private investigators, carefully worded inquiries through social services, delicate conversations with shelter directors who knew better than to ask too many questions about why Claire Voss was interested in the city's homeless population. The name Daniel Reed had surfaced repeatedly, a former teacher, recently sober, known for his kindness and intelligence among the bridge community. The bridge loomed ahead, its concrete pillars casting long shadows in the afternoon light. Beneath it, Claire could see the evidence of human habitation: tarps and cardboard, shopping carts, and the small fires people built for warmth and cooking. The smell hit her first: unwashed bodies, garbage, smoke followed by the sounds of quiet conversation and someone playing a harmonica badly. She found Daniel exactly where her investigator had said he would be, sitting on a plastic crate with a book open in his lap. Even in the harsh circumstances, there was something gentle about his posture, something thoughtful in the way he turned the pages. He was older than she'd expected, probably mid-40s, with gray threading through his brown hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of both hardship and kindness. "Excuse me," Claire said, her voice smaller than intended. "Are you Daniel Reed?" He looked up, surprised to see a woman who clearly didn't belong in this place. His eyes were hazel, intelligent, and deeply tired. "Yes. Can I help you?" The question was so polite, so genuinely concerned, despite her obvious displacement, that Claire almost lost her nerve. She'd rehearsed this conversation dozens of times, but sitting here in front of this real person, the words felt impossible. "My name is Claire. I have a proposition for you." Something unusual? Daniel closed his book carefully, giving her his full attention. "Are you from social services?" "Because I'm not looking for housing assistance right now." "No, I'm not from social scissors." Claire sat down on a nearby crate without invitation, trying to make herself less imposing. This is going to sound strange, and I want you to know. You can say no. There wouldn't be any consequences for saying no. Something in her tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the moment, because Daniel's expression grew more focused. I'm listening. Claire took a breath and spoke the words that would change both their lives. I can't have children. My body won't allow it. I've tried everything, surgery, treatments, specialists, but nothing works. I'm 42 years old, and I'm running out of time. Daniel waited, sensing there was more. I'd like to offer you $100,000 to father a child with me. The words hung in the air between them like something tangible and shocking. Daniel's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been offense. I'm sorry, he said finally. Could you repeat that? Claire forced herself to maintain eye contact. I'm proposing a biological arrangement. I would become pregnant naturally. You would be compensated financially, and I would raise the child alone. No ongoing obligations, no parental responsibilities. Just a transaction. Daniel stood up abruptly, the book falling from his lap. Lady, I don't know what kind of person you think I am, but I think you're someone who's fallen on hard times but maintained his dignity. Claire interrupted. I think you're someone who understands that sometimes life requires difficult choices, and you think I'm desperate enough to sell myself for money? The hurt in his voice made Claire realize how badly she'd miscalculated. She'd approached this like a business negotiation, focusing on the transaction rather than the human being she was asking to participate in it. I think you're someone who might understand desperation, she said quietly. Because I'm desperate, Mr. Reed. I spent 15 years trying to become a mother. I've had 7 miscarriages, 3 surgeries, and more medical procedures than I can count. I've lost relationships, isolated myself from friends with children, and built a life around this one desire that seems impossible to fulfill. Daniel sat back down, his anger replaced by something more complex. Why me? Why not, I don't know, a sperm bank? Artificial insemination? Because those options require a functioning reproductive system, which I don't have. Because I need someone who might understand that sometimes conventional paths don't work. Claire's voice grew steadier as she found her honesty. And because my investigator told me you're kind to people who need kindness, that you share your food even when you don't have enough, and that you see beauty in places where others see only ugliness. Your investigator? I've been watching this community for weeks, trying to understand who lives here and why. Your name came up repeatedly as someone who helps others, someone who's managed to stay human despite everything you've lost. Daniel picked up his book, running his fingers over its worn cover. What did your investigator tell you about what I've lost? That you were a music teacher, that your wife died in a car accident, that you've been sober for 8 months and clean for longer than that. Did he tell you why I was drinking? Grief, I assume. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, watching the traffic pass overhead. Maria and I were trying to have children when she died. 3 years of trying, 2 miscarriages. She was pregnant. Again, when the accident happened 6 weeks along. I lost my wife and my child in the same moment. Claire felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than shared grief. I'm sorry. After that, I couldn't be around anything that reminded me of what we planned. Teaching children, being in our house where we talked about nurseries and names. I started drinking to make it stop hurting, and when that didn't work, I drank to make everything stop. They sat in silence. 2 people who'd approached the desire for children from different directions, but arrived at the same place of loss. $100,000, Daniel said finally. Yes, that's enough money to get me off the streets permanently. Get clean clothes, a decent apartment, maybe even think about teaching again. It could be yes. Daniel looked at her directly for the first time since she'd made her proposal. And you'd really be willing to do this? To have a child with a homeless man you've never met. I've met you now, Claire said. And homeless doesn't define who you are. But it's what I am right now. It's been what I am for 2 years. Claire leaned forward, her business instincts finally finding their footing. Mr. Reed, I believe we're both people who've had our lives derailed by circumstances beyond our control. I'm offering you a chance to change your circumstances, and you'd be giving me a chance to change mine. Daniel stood up again, this time more slowly. I need to think about this, of course. And I need to understand exactly what you're asking. The legal implications, the medical requirements, all of it. Claire reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. This is my lawyer's number. Marcus Fitzgerald. He's prepared to explain everything and answer any questions you have. No obligations. Daniel took the card, staring at it as if it might disappear. Claire what? Voss. Claire Voss. If the name meant anything to him, he didn't show it. And? You're sure about this? About all of it? Claire stood as well, realizing that the conversation had shifted from proposition to negotiation. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Give me 3 days, Daniel said. I'll call you. Liar in 3 days. As Claire walked back through the neighborhood toward where James waited with the car, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope mixed with terror in equal measure. Behind her, Daniel Reed sat back down with his book, but she suspected he wasn't reading. He was making a decision that would change everything for both of them. 3 days later, Marcus Fitzgerald's phone rang. The fertility clinic on Park Avenue looked more like a luxury hotel than a medical facility. Daniel stood in the marble lobby, acutely aware of how his thrift store clothes and nervous energy marked him as an outsider. He'd spent the morning at a community center shower, scrubbing away the residue of street life, but still felt unprepared for this sterile world of hushed voices and expensive art. Claire appeared at his elbow, having arrived separately as they'd agreed. Thank you for coming. She looked different here, more in her element, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than Daniel had seen in years. But her voice carried the same uncertainty he felt. Dr. Martinez will see you both now, the receptionist announced, her smile professional and practiced. The doctor's office was all warm wood and soft lighting, designed to make difficult conversations feel more manageable. Dr. Elena Martinez was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the sort of calm competence that came from years of helping people navigate the complexities of reproduction. Ms. Voss has explained your unique situation. She began, addressing both of them equally. I want to make sure you both understand the medical aspects of what you're considering. Daniel appreciated that she didn't seem surprised or judgmental. In the 3 days since Claire's proposal, he'd imagined this moment dozens of times, always picturing shock or disapproval from the medical professionals who would make this possible. The process itself is relatively straightforward, Dr. Martinez continued. We'll monitor Ms. Voss's cycle, determine optimal timing, and facilitate conception through intrauterine insemination. It's less invasive than IVF and gives us the best chance of success given her medical history. What are the actual chances? Claire asked. Daniel noticed her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Given your age and condition, realistically about 15 to 20% per cycle. We might need to try several times. The number hung heavy in the room. Daniel found himself doing mental math, multiple clinic visits, more time in this unfamiliar world, more opportunities for the arrangement to feel real instead of theoretical. And the pregnancy itself? He asked. Assuming it works? Ms. Voss would be considered high risk due to her age and medical history. But Dr. Chen in our obstetrics department is excellent with complicated pregnancies. We'd monitor everything very closely. They spent the next hour filling out paperwork that reduced their unusual arrangement to medical terminology and legal boxes to check. Daniel found the clinical language oddly comforting. It made the whole thing feel less personal, less emotionally complicated. "I need to ask," Dr. Martinez said as they prepared to leave. "Have you both considered counseling? This type of arrangement can be more emotionally complex than people anticipate." Claire's response was quick and definitive. "We've discussed boundaries very clearly. This is a medical procedure, not a relationship." Daniel nodded agreement, though something in him bristled at the dismissive tone. But he'd signed contracts that Marcus Fitzgerald had spent hours explaining, documents that made it clear his role would end at conception. The money half up front, half upon confirmed pregnancy, was already more than he'd dreamed of having again. 2 weeks later, they were back for the first attempt. Daniel had used some of his advance payment to get a room at a weekly motel, complete with a shower and clean sheets. The luxury felt foreign after so long on the streets, but he was grateful for the privacy and dignity it provided. The procedure room was small and sterile, decorated with the same soothing pastels as the rest of the clinic. Claire lay on the Fail examination table, her face turned toward the ceiling, while Daniel sat in a chair nearby feeling superfluous and awkward. "This will take just a few minutes," the nurse explained. "Mr. Reed, you can wait here or in the waiting room, whatever you prefer." "I'll stay," Daniel said, surprising himself. He'd planned to leave, to maintain the emotional distance that their contract stipulated, but something about Claire's vulnerability in that moment made leaving feel wrong. The actual insemination was clinical and quick, but the waiting afterward stretched with uncomfortable silence. Claire remained on the table for the recommended 15 minutes while Daniel studied the motivational posters on the wall soft focus. Images of babies and families with inspiring quotes about hope and miracles. "This is strange," Claire said finally. "Which part?" "All of it. You being here, me doing this. The whole situation." Daniel considered his response carefully. They both agreed to keep things businesslike, but the intimacy of what they were attempting seemed to demand more honesty. "Do you regret it?" "No," Claire said without hesitation. "Do you?" "I don't know yet." She turned her head to look at him. "What would make you regret it?" Daniel thought about the question, surprised by how much he wanted to answer it honestly. "If it doesn't work and I took your money for nothing. If it does work, and I spend the rest of my life wondering about a child I'll never know. The contract. I know what the contract says, but contracts don't control feelings." Claire was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've spent so long wanting a child that I haven't thought much about what happens after I have one, about actually being a mother." "You'll be fine," Daniel said, meaning it. "You're clearly someone who commits completely to things you care about." "How can you tell?" "Because you found a homeless man under a bridge and convinced him to help you have a baby. That takes a particular kind of determination." Despite everything, Claire smiled. "When you put it like that, it does sound slightly insane. The best decisions usually do." The nurse returned to tell Claire she could get dressed, and the spell of unexpected intimacy broke. They left the clinic separately, as planned, with instructions to return in 2 weeks for a pregnancy test. Daniel spent those 2 weeks in a strange limbo. The motel room gave him space to think clearly for the first time in months, and he found himself imagining different futures, one where the procedure worked and Claire got her baby, one where it failed and they tried again, one where he took the money and disappeared back into the anonymity of street life. But he also found himself thinking about Claire in ways the contract hadn't anticipated. Her vulnerability during the procedure, her admission about not being ready for motherhood, the way she'd looked at him when she smiled. He reminded himself repeatedly that she was paying him for a service, that any emotional connection he felt was one-sided and inappropriate. The pregnancy test was negative. Dr. Martinez delivered the news with professional sympathy. "This is completely normal. Most couples try for several months before conceiving, even under ideal circumstances." Claire's face showed nothing, but Daniel noticed her hands shake slightly as she put her purse back on her shoulder. So we try again next month? If you're both comfortable with that, yes. Outside the clinic, Claire turned to him with an expression he couldn't read. Are you comfortable with that? Daniel realized that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, his answer had changed. The first attempt had felt like a transaction, but something about going through it together had made it feel like a shared endeavor. Double quotes. Yes, he said. I'm comfortable with trying again. Good. Claire seemed genuinely relieved. I was worried you might decide this was too complicated. It is too complicated, Daniel said. But I think some things are supposed to be. As they parted ways outside the clinic, Daniel found himself looking forward to their next appointment in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the possibility that they might actually succeed. The second attempt came with less nervousness and more familiarity. Daniel had learned the clinic's rhythms, the soft classical music in the waiting room, the way the nurses spoke in hushed, encouraging tones, the particular antiseptic smell that marked medical optimism. He'd also grown more comfortable with his role in the process, though the emotional boundaries he'd expected to maintain were proving more permeable than anticipated. Claire seemed different too, less rigid in her interactions with the staff and more willing to acknowledge his presence as more than just a necessary component of the procedure. When Dr. Martinez suggested they both attend a brief counseling session about realistic expectations, Claire agreed without her previous resistance. Many intended parents find that the clinical nature of assisted reproduction can feel disconnected from their emotional goals, the counselor explained. It's important to remember that this process is about creating life, which is inherently personal and meaningful. Daniel found himself studying Claire's reaction to this reminder. Her face maintained its usual composure, but he noticed the way her fingers worried the edge of her jacket, a small tell that suggested the clinical approach wasn't as easy for her as she pretended. How do you both feel about the possibility of multiple attempts? The counselor continued. Determined, Claire said immediately. Hopeful, Daniel added, surprising himself with the honesty. After the session, they walked to the procedure room together, a routine that was becoming comfortable. The nurse, Jenny, had gotten to know them over the past month and treated them with the easy familiarity reserved for regular patients. How are you feeling about this one? Jenny asked as she prepared Claire for the procedure. More confident, Claire admitted. My cycle feels more regular this month. Daniel settled into what had become his usual chair, no longer questioning his decision to stay during the procedure. The arrangement might be unconventional, but the process felt important enough to warrant his presence. Mr. Reed, Jenny said, Dr. Martinez wanted me to mention that your test results have been consistently excellent. Sometimes that's half the battle. Daniel nodded, unsure how to respond to praise for something so fundamentally personal. But he caught Claire's small smile and realized she was pleased by the news. The insemination proceeded smoothly, and they settled into the familiar 15-minute wait. Daniel had brought a book this time, a collection of short stories he'd found at a used bookstore, but found himself watching Claire instead of reading. Can I ask you something? Claire said, breaking their comfortable silence. Sure. What made you say yes? Really? Daniel set down his book, considering his answer carefully. At first, the money. I won't lie about that. $100,000 represented a completely different life, housing, stability, the possibility of teaching again. And now? Now it's more complicated. Daniel paused, trying to find words for feelings he barely understood himself. There's something about trying to create life, even in these circumstances, that feels meaningful, important. Claire turned her head to study his face. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone more desperate, more willing to take the money and disappear. Someone who wouldn't. She stopped herself. Someone who wouldn't what? Someone who wouldn't make me feel like we're actually in this together. The admission hung between them, more intimate than anything they'd shared despite the clinical nature of their arrangement. Daniel felt the dangerous pull of connection, the risk of caring more than their contract allowed. "Claire," he said carefully, "what happens if this works?" "Really happens? I have a baby. You get the rest of your payment. We go our separate ways. And you're comfortable with that?" Claire was quiet for a long moment. "I have to be comfortable with that. It's what we agreed to." But Daniel noticed. She didn't say yes. 2 weeks later, Claire stood in the bathroom of her penthouse, staring at the pregnancy test in her hands. 2 pink lines, clear and unmistakable. After 15 years of negative tests, the positive result felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. She called the clinic first, then sat in her office for an hour trying to process the reality. She was pregnant. At 42, through an arrangement that most people would find scandalous. She was finally pregnant. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Martinez's office, asking her to come in for blood work to confirm the results. As she gathered her things, she realized she needed to call Daniel. The contract specified that he be informed of positive results, but more than obligation. She found herself wanting to share the news with the one person who would understand what this moment meant. Daniel answered on the second ring. "Claire?" "It worked," she said simply. Silence on the other end, then a sound that might have been released breath or quiet celebration. "You sure?" "Positive test this morning. I'm going to the clinic now for confirmation." Daniel's voice caught slightly. "That's wonderful, Claire. Really wonderful. Would you like to come to the appointment?" "You don't have to, but yes," Daniel said before she could finish. "I'd like to be there." They met at the clinic entrance, both trying to contain excitement. That felt too large for the careful boundaries they'd established. The blood work confirmed what the home test had indicated. Claire was pregnant. About 4 weeks along. Dr. Martinez scheduled them for an ultrasound in 3 weeks, explaining the importance of early monitoring given Claire's medical history. "Everything looks good so far, but we'll want to see you regularly throughout the first trimester." As they left the clinic, Daniel turned to Claire with an expression of wonder that matched her own feelings. "We did it." "We did it," Claire agreed. They stood on the sidewalk, 2 people who'd achieved something remarkable together, unsure how to acknowledge the moment without crossing lines their arrangement had drawn. "I should," Claire began. "I know," Daniel sighed. "Separate lives from here." But neither of them moved to leave, and in that hesitation was the seed of complications neither had anticipated. Creating life, even through the most clinical means, had proven to be more personal than either had imagined. "Thank you," Claire said finally, "for taking the chance, for helping me. Thank you for trusting me with something so important." As Claire walked toward her car and Daniel toward the subway, both carried the knowledge that their simple transaction had become something much more complex. In 3 weeks, they would see their child for the first time on an ultrasound screen, and the reality of what they'd created together would become impossible to ignore. The first ultrasound appointment carried weight that went far beyond medical routine. Claire arrived early, her hands trembling slightly as she filled out paperwork that asked questions about family history and genetic concerns. For the first time, she had to consider Daniel's medical background as relevant to her child's future, a reminder that this baby would be genetically half his, carrying traits and tendencies from a man she barely knew. Daniel appeared in the waiting room precisely on time, wearing clothes that Claire recognized as new dark jeans and a button-down shirt that suggested he was taking this appointment seriously. His presence felt both natural and surreal. Other couples in the waiting room held hands and whispered excitedly about seeing their babies for the first time. Claire and Daniel sat with careful space between them, their relationship too complex for such simple intimacy. "Claire Voss?" The ultrasound technician, a cheerful woman named Beth, called them back to a dimly lit room dominated by a large monitor and examination table. "Is this your first ultrasound?" Beth asked as she prepared the equipment. "Yes," Claire said, then glanced at Daniel. "For both of us." Beth didn't seem to notice anything unusual about their dynamic as she explained the procedure. "You're about 7 weeks along, so we should be able to see quite a bit. The baby will be tiny, about the size of a blueberry, but we'll be able to detect the heartbeat." Claire lay back on the examination table, her shirt lifted to expose her. Still flat stomach. The gel was cold, and she startled at the contact. Daniel instinctively leaned forward in his chair, then caught himself and settled back. "There we go," Beth said, moving the ultrasound wand across Claire's abdomen. The monitor filled with grainy black and white images that meant nothing to Claire's untrained eye. But Beth's smile suggested good news. "See this little shape here?" Beth pointed to a small, beam-like shadow on the screen. "That's your baby." Claire's breath caught. After years of imagining this moment, the reality felt overwhelming. The tiny figure on the screen was barely recognizable as human, but it was undeniably alive, undeniably hers. And here, Beth adjusted the wand slightly, and suddenly the room filled with a rapid, rhythmic sound. "That's the heartbeat." The sound hit Daniel like a physical force. He'd expected to feel detached, to maintain the emotional distance their arrangement required. Instead, he found himself staring at the screen with an intensity that surprised him. That was his child's heartbeat, strong and fast and unmistakably real. "Everything looks perfect," Beth continued, taking measurements and marking images. "Good size for gestational age. Heartbeat is strong at 162 beats per minute. Mom, how are you feeling?" "Tired," Claire admitted, "and nauseous in the mornings." "Completely normal. Those are actually good signs that your hormone levels are where they should be." Beth printed several ultrasound photos, handing them to Claire with a smile. "Congratulations to both of you." Outside the clinic, Claire stared at the photos in her hands. The grainy images seemed almost magical proof that her body was finally doing what it was supposed to do, that the child she dreamed of for so long was actually growing inside her. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked. "Terrified," Claire said honestly. "And grateful. And completely unprepared for how real this would feel." Daniel nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Can I?" He gestured toward the photos. Claire handed him one of the copies, watching as he studied the image with the same wonder she felt. "What are you thinking?" "I didn't expect to feel so—" Daniel searched for the right word. "Invested." The admission created tension between them. Their contract had been clear about emotional boundaries, but standing here with proof of their child's existence, those boundaries felt artificial and impossible to maintain. "Daniel," Claire said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay. Are you going to be able to walk away from this? Really walk away?" Daniel looked at the ultrasound photo again, then back at Claire. "I don't know. Are you going to be able to let me?" The question hung between them, exposing the fundamental flaw in their careful planning. They'd arranged for conception but hadn't truly considered the emotional reality of creating life together. Claire's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Board meeting moved to 4 p.m. Also, someone from the Times called asking about rumors. "Call me." The outside world intruded with a reminder that Claire's life extended far beyond this pregnancy. She was a public figure, CEO of a major corporation, and eventually, people would notice her condition and ask questions. "I should go," Claire said. "But Daniel, we need to talk about what happens next. Really talk. I know. This is more complicated than either of us expected." Daniel folded the ultrasound photo carefully and put it in his wallet. "The best things usually are." As they parted ways, Both carried the sound of their child's heartbeat and the growing realization that their simple arrangement had become something neither fully understood. The pregnancy was progressing normally, but the relationship between the parents was evolving in ways their contract had never anticipated. That evening, Claire sat in her office long after her staff had gone home, staring at the ultrasound photo taped to her computer monitor. The board meeting had gone well. Quarterly profits were up. The new cloud storage initiative was ahead of schedule, and her leadership team seemed energized by upcoming product launches. But all of it felt distant compared to the tiny heartbeat. She'd heard that morning. Sarah knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege earned through years of managing Claire's professional and personal chaos. "So," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from Claire's desk, "are you going to tell me what's going on? And don't say nothing, because I've never seen you tape baby pictures to your monitor before." Claire looked at her assistant, closest thing she had to a friend, and realized she was tired of carrying this secret alone. "I'm pregnant. I figured that much out." The morning sickness, the doctor appointments, the general glow of impending motherhood. Sarah paused. "What I can't figure out is why you look terrified instead of happy. Because it's complicated." "Complicated how?" Claire took a breath and told Sarah everything. The failed fertility treatments, the desperate decision to find a sperm donor outside traditional channels, the arrangement with Daniel, the growing emotional complexity of their situation. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression shifting from surprise to concern to something approaching admiration. "You hired a homeless man to father your child," Sarah said finally. "That's not how I'd phrase it, but essentially, yes. And now you're both catching feelings." Claire winced at the casual terminology, but couldn't deny its accuracy. The contract was supposed to prevent that. "Claire," Sarah said gently, "you can't contract away human emotion. You created life with this man. Of course, you're both invested. But what do I do now? He wants to be involved, and you want him to be involved. I don't know what I want. I spent so long focused on getting pregnant that I didn't think about what comes after." Sarah leaned forward, her voice serious. "What kind of man is he? Really?" Claire thought about Daniel's gentleness during the medical procedures, his thoughtful questions, the way he'd looked at the ultrasound screen. "He's kind, intelligent. He sees beauty in things others overlook." "Then maybe the question isn't whether you should let him be involved," Sarah said. "Maybe it's whether you can afford not to." Meanwhile, across the city, Daniel sat in his small apartment, the first real home he'd had in 2 years, holding the ultrasound photo and wondering what kind of father he might become. The money from Claire had allowed him to rent the place, buy proper clothes, and even think about returning to work. But more than financial stability, the pregnancy had given him something he'd lost when Maria died, a reason to build a future. His phone rang, and he recognized the number as Tommy from the bridge. "Professor, how's the fancy life treating you?" "It's good, Tommy. Really good. How are things down there?" "Same old, you know. But listen, man, there's talk about you. About some rich lady and a baby. People are saying crazy things." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "That you got some billionaire pregnant for money. That it's gonna be in the papers." The conversation with Tommy confirmed Daniel's growing worry that their secret wouldn't stay secret much longer. In a city of 8 million people, privacy was a luxury that even careful planning couldn't guarantee. After hanging up, Daniel stared at the ultrasound photo again. In 6 months, he would have a child in the world, a son or daughter who would carry his genes and grow up in circumstances he could barely imagine. The contract said he would have no parental rights or responsibilities, but the tiny heartbeat he'd heard that morning suggested otherwise. For the first time since agreeing to Claire's proposal, Daniel wondered if he'd made a mistake, not in saying yes, but in believing he could walk away. The New York Post headline was blunt and sensational. Tech billionaire's baby daddy. Homeless man scores $100,000 payday. Below it, a grainy photo showed Claire and Daniel leaving the fertility clinic together, her hand protectively placed over her barely visible bump. Claire stared at the newspaper on her desk, her coffee growing cold as she read the article that reduced their complex arrangement to crude tabloid fodder. The reporter had somehow obtained details about Daniel's background, her fertility struggles, and even quotes from unnamed sources speculating about the bizarre contract between them. Her phone had been ringing nonstop since 6 a.m. Sarah fielded calls from board members, investors, reporters, and what seemed like every news outlet in the country. The story had already spread to social media, where opinions ranged from supportive to vicious. Miss Voss? Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking harried. The board wants an emergency meeting. Mr. Fitzgerald is here to discuss legal options. And she hesitated. Daniel Reed is in the lobby. He says he needs to see you. Claire's first instinct was to hide, to let her lawyers handle the damage control while she retreated to the safety of corporate protocol. But the thought of Daniel facing this media storm alone made that impossible. Send him up. Cancel the board meeting until this afternoon. Daniel entered her office, looking shaken but determined. He'd clearly seen the newspaper. His jaw was set. In the tight lines she'd learned to recognize when he was angry. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I don't know how they found out, but I'm sorry you're dealing with this because of me. It's not your fault." Claire gestured to the chair across. From her desk. "Tommy called you?" "Among others." Apparently, the reporter found people at the bridge, offered money for information. Daniel sat down heavily. "They made it sound like I seduced you for money. Like I targeted you specifically. We both know that's not true." "Do we?" Daniel's voice carried an edge of self-doubt. "Because looking at this, a homeless man and a billionaire, it's exactly what people would assume." Claire studied his face, seeing the shame he was trying to hide. "Daniel, are you having second thoughts about this? About the baby?" "No," he said firmly. "I'm having second thoughts about my ability to be part of this child's life without destroying yours." The admission hit Claire harder than she'd expected. Over the past weeks, she'd grown accustomed to sharing the pregnancy experience with him. The appointments, the excitement, the planning. The thought of going through the rest of it alone felt wrong. What if I don't want you to disappear? Daniel looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the contract was wrong? What if trying to separate the biological from the emotional was naive?" Before Daniel could respond, Sarah knocked and entered with Marcus Fitzgerald close behind. Claire's lawyer looked grim, carrying a stack of newspapers and legal documents. "Claire, we need to discuss damage control," Marcus said, then paused. When he noticed Daniel, "Mr. Reed, I assume you've seen the coverage. Hard to miss." Marcus spread several newspapers across Claire's desk, each with variations of the same story. "It's not just local. CNN, Fox, even the BBC have picked this up. Your stock price dropped 3% in pre-market trading. What are our legal options?" Claire asked. "Limited. Most of what they've published is technically accurate, even if the presentation is sensationalized. We could pursue invasion of privacy claims, but that would require proving the information was obtained illegally." Daniel stood up. Abruptly, "I should go. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." "Sit down," Claire said, her CEO voice cutting through the tension. "Marcus, give us a minute." After the lawyer left, Claire turned to Daniel with determination she'd learned from years of corporate crises. "We have two choices. We can let the media narrative define us, or we can take control of the story ourselves." "What do you mean?" "I mean we tell the truth, on our terms, in our words." Daniel shook his head. "Claire, You don't understand what this kind of attention means for someone like me. I've been invisible for 2 years. Now every mistake I've ever made, every night I spent drunk or desperate, is going to be public knowledge. And every act of kindness, every moment of dignity, every reason I chose you will be public too. The simple statement, every reason I chose you, shifted something between them. Daniel heard in it not just professional damage control, but personal defense. You'd really do that? Risk your reputation to defend this arrangement? Daniel, my reputation was built on making difficult decisions and standing by them. I'm not going to start backing down now. They were interrupted by Sarah's return. Claire, I have good news and bad news. The bad news is that someone leaked to the press that you'll be at Dr. Martinez's office for your appointment tomorrow. There are already photographers outside the clinic. And the good news? The View wants to interview you both. Together. Tomorrow afternoon. Claire and Daniel looked at each other, both recognizing the opportunity and the risk. A national television appearance could humanize their story or make them objects of ridicule. What do you think? Claire asked Daniel. I think I'm terrified of being on television, but I'm more terrified of letting other people tell our story. Then we do it together. That evening, Claire found herself in the unusual position of preparing for a television interview that would require her to defend the most personal decision of her life. Sarah had arranged for a media consultant, but Claire realized that no amount of coaching could prepare her for questions about love, motherhood, and the man who'd made both possible. Daniel called at 8 p.m., his voice steady but nervous. Claire, are you sure about this? Once we go on television together, there's no going back to the original arrangement. Are you asking me if I'm ready to admit that our arrangement became something more than a contract? I guess I am. Claire looked at the ultrasound photo on her desk, then at the empty nursery down the hall that would soon be filled with life. Yes, I'm ready. Are you? I'm ready to tell the truth about what kind of person you are, about how you saw something in me that I'd stopped seeing in myself. And I'm ready to tell them about your dignity, your kindness, and why any child would be lucky to have you as a father. The words were out before Claire could stop them, an admission that went far beyond their original agreement. The silence on the phone stretched until Daniel spoke. Did you just say father? I did. Not sperm donor. Not biological contributor. Father. Yes. Claire, what exactly are we agreeing to here? I don't know yet, but I know our child deserves parents who aren't ashamed of how they came to be. And I know I don't want to do this without you. As they hung up, both understood that tomorrow's television appearance would mark the end of their carefully structured arrangement and the beginning of something entirely new. The media attention had forced them to confront feelings they'd been avoiding and make decisions they'd been postponing. In 12 hours, they would sit on national television and explain how a billionaire and a homeless man had found their way to parenthood together. But more importantly, they would publicly acknowledge that creating life had created something between them that no contract could define or contain. The View studio buzzed with the particular energy that came with controversial guests. Claire sat in makeup, watching the monitor as the host discussed her upcoming segment with a mixture of fascination and judgment. The show had positioned the interview as an exploration of modern families and unconventional choices. But Claire suspected the real draw was the spectacle of her situation. Daniel arrived 30 minutes before airtime, looking uncomfortable, in the suit Claire had insisted on buying him. The media consultant had coached them both on staying calm, answering directly, and humanizing their story. But no amount of preparation could eliminate the risk of public humiliation. You ready for this? Claire asked as they waited in the green room. No, Daniel said honestly. But I figure if I survive 2 years on the streets, I can survive 20 minutes on television. Whoopi Goldberg introduced them with surprising warmth, focusing on Claire's business achievements and Daniel's background as an educator rather than his recent homelessness. But the first question cut straight to the heart of their unconventional arrangement. "Claire, you're worth $12 billion, Joy Behar said. Why didn't you just use a traditional sperm bank or hire a surrogate?" Claire had anticipated this question, but sitting under studio lights with millions of people watching made her prepared answer feel inadequate. "Because my medical condition made traditional options impossible. And because I wanted more than anonymous genetic material. I wanted to know the person helping me create life." "Daniel," Sonny Hostin turned to him. "What made you agree to this arrangement? Was it just the money?" Daniel looked directly into the camera, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "Initially, yes. $100,000 represented a completely different life for someone in my situation. But it became about more than money when I realized what this meant to Claire and what it might mean to have a child in the world." "Are you saying you want parental rights?" Sarahan asked, leaning forward with interest. The question hung in the air, unscripted and dangerous. Claire felt her carefully prepared talking points evaporate as she waited for Daniel's response. "I'm saying I want what's best for this child," Daniel said carefully. "If that means staying out of their life, I'll do that. If it means being involved, I'm prepared for that too." Whoopi nodded approvingly. "That sounds like something a father would say." The word father created a visible shift in both guests. Claire straightened in her chair, and Daniel's expression softened in a way that the cameras caught immediately. "Claire," Whoopi continued, "how do you feel about Daniel wanting to be involved as a father rather than just a sperm donor?" Claire looked at Daniel, seeing in his face the same gentle strength that had attracted her to him in the first place. The honest answer was that his desire to be involved had complicated everything she'd planned, but it had also given her something she hadn't expected, a partner in parenthood. "I feel like this child is incredibly fortunate to have two people who want them so much," Claire said. "Our arrangement started as a business transaction, but creating life together has made us realize that children aren't business deals. They're blessings that require love, not contracts." "So you're saying the arrangement has changed?" Joy pressed. "I'm saying we've changed," Claire replied. "Both of us." The interview continued for another 10 minutes, covering their backgrounds, their medical journey, and their plans for the future. But the damage or breakthrough had been done in those first few exchanges. They'd publicly acknowledged that. Their transactional arrangement had become something more personal and complex, as they left the studio. Daniel turned to Claire with an expression of relief mixed with apprehension. "Well, that's done. Now going back now. Do you regret it? What you said about wanting to be involved. Do you regret saying this child was fortunate to have both of us?" They stood on the sidewalk outside of BC Studios. Two people who just made their private evolution public, unsure what came next. "Daniel," Claire said, "I think we need to tear up our contract. And replace it with what? I don't know yet. But I know it needs to be based on what's best for our child, not what's legally simplest for us." Daniel nodded slowly. "I'd like that. I'd like to be a real father, not just a genetic contributor. And I'd like to be a real mother, not just a single parent with a complicated origin story." They were interrupted by Claire's phone buzzing with what would be the first of hundreds of responses to their television appearance. The interview would be dissected by media outlets, discussed on social media, and analyzed by legal experts. But standing there together, Claire and Daniel felt like they'd finally told the truth about what their arrangement had become. 3 hours later, they sat in Marcus Fitzgerald's office, officially terminating their original contract and beginning the complex process of establishing joint custody and parental rights. The legal framework was unprecedented. A billionaire, CEO, and a formerly homeless music teacher, bound together by a child and a growing understanding that conventional definitions of family didn't always apply. "This is uncharted territory," Marcus warned them. There's no legal precedent for this kind of arrangement evolution. If you change your minds, if this doesn't work out, it's going to be messy. Most worthwhile things are messy, Daniel said, echoing what he'd told Claire. Months earlier, Claire signed the custody papers first, then handed the pen to Daniel. As he wrote his name, officially claiming legal rights to their unborn child, she felt a shift in her understanding of what parenthood meant. For years, she'd focused on having a baby. Now she was learning about sharing one. "There's something else we need to discuss," Claire said as they prepared to leave the lawyer's office. "Living arrangements. If we're going to co-parent, we need to figure out logistics." Daniel had been thinking about the same issue. His small apartment was adequate for one person, but hardly suitable for a child's visits. Claire's mansion had plenty of space but felt emotionally sterile, not the kind of environment where a child could easily move between two homes. "What if?" Daniel began, then stopped himself. What if we tried something unconventional? A house with separate living spaces but shared common areas? Somewhere our child could have both parents without the confusion of shuttling between two completely different worlds. The suggestion was radical, practical, and slightly terrifying. Claire had lived alone for so long that sharing space with anyone, especially Daniel, felt like another fundamental change in her carefully controlled life. "You mean live together?" "I mean live as co-parents. Separate, but connected, for the child's sake." Claire considered the idea, imagining morning routines shared with someone who understood the significance of their unusual family bedtime stories, read by a father who saw beauty in unexpected places, holidays celebrated by parents who'd chosen each other not for love, but for the love of their child. "It would be complicated," she said. "Everything about us is complicated. The media would have a field day." "The media is already having a field day." Claire looked at Daniel, seeing in him not the desperate man she'd approached under a bridge, but a partner in the most important endeavor of her life. The transformation in both of them had been gradual but undeniable. "Let's look at houses," she said, as they left the lawyer's office together. Planning a shared future neither had imagined when they first signed their contract. Claire realized that her desperate desire for a child had led her to something she'd never thought to want: a family built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the kind of love that develops when two people commit to putting someone else's needs first. The pregnancy was progressing normally, but everything else about their situation had become beautifully, chaotically, wonderfully abnormal. The house Claire and Daniel found was a restored Victorian in Brooklyn Heights, close enough to Manhattan for Claire's work, but far enough to feel like a fresh start. It had been converted into a duplex by previous owners, two separate living spaces connected by a shared kitchen and family room, with a garden where a child could play safely, standing in the empty nursery on the main floor, 6 months pregnant. And showing clearly now, Claire tried to imagine their unconventional family inhabiting this space. Daniel's apartment would be upstairs, hers on the main level, and their child would move freely between both, never having to choose between parents. "The seller accepted our offer," Daniel said, joining her in the nursery. He'd been handling the practical aspects of the purchase, something that would have surprised Claire 6 months earlier. Now she valued his attention to details she might overlook in her focus on the bigger picture. "It feels real now," Claire said, running her hand over her rounded belly. "All of it." The past month had been a whirlwind of media attention, legal complications, and personal adjustments. Their television appearance had generated mostly positive responses, but it had also attracted scrutiny from child welfare services, questions from the SEC about Claire's fitness to lead a public company, and invasive interest from tabloid reporters who camped outside her current home. Dr. Martinez had recommended they find a new obstetrician, someone not overwhelmed by the media attention surrounding their case. Dr. Sarah Chun, no relation to Claire's assistant, specialized in high-risk pregnancies and complex family situations. She'd assured them that their arrangement, while unusual, posed no medical concerns for mother or baby. "How are you feeling about the custody hearing next week?" Daniel asked, settling into the rocking chair they'd bought for this room. "Nervous," Claire admitted. "Even though it's just a formality to establish joint custody, I keep worrying something will go wrong." The legal process had been more complex than either anticipated, because their original contract had attempted to terminate Daniel's parental rights. Establishing them officially required court approval. Marcus had assured them it was routine, but the media attention had made everything about their situation feel precarious. "Claire," Daniel said carefully, "are you having any doubts about this arrangement, about us living together, about any of it?" The question was one they'd both been avoiding. Their relationship had evolved so gradually that neither had paused to consider whether they were making decisions from choice or momentum. "Are you?" I asked first. Claire sat down heavily in the glider they positioned near the window. At 6 months pregnant, her body had finally achieved what it had refused to do for 15 years. But the physical changes felt secondary to the emotional transformation she'd undergone. "I have doubts about my ability to be a good mother," she said honestly. "I have doubts about whether we can make this living arrangement work long-term. But I don't have doubts about wanting you in our child's life." "Our child," Daniel repeated. "I still can't believe I get to say that. What about you? Any doubts?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking around the room that would soon hold their daughter. They'd learned the gender at the last ultrasound, a piece of information that had made everything feel more specific and real. "I have doubts about whether I deserve this," he said finally. 2 years ago, I was sleeping under a bridge, drinking myself to death. Now I'm about to become a father to a child who'll never want for anything. Sometimes it feels like too much good fortune for one lifetime. Daniel, you know, that's not how this works, right? You didn't win some cosmic lottery. You're here because you're kind, because you see beauty where others see emptiness, because you have something to offer a child that money can't buy. What's that? The ability to find meaning in difficult circumstances, resilience, compassion. Claire paused, realizing she was describing qualities she'd learned to value through knowing him. The things that make someone a good father. Their conversation was interrupted by Claire's phone. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, along with the urgent tone that meant business crisis. "I have to take this," Claire said, answering the call. "Claire, we have a problem." Sarah's voice was tight with stress. "Someone leaked the custody petition to the press. Not just the fact that it exists, the actual document, with details about the financial arrangements and living situation." Claire felt her stomach drop. The custody petition contained private information about Daniel's background, her medical history, and their financial arrangements. It also included their plans for shared housing, which the media could easily sensationalize. How bad is it? TMZ is running with billionaire's baby daddy demands mansion. The Post has rich mom, poor dad. Recipe for disaster? And that's just the beginning. Claire looked at Daniel, who'd clearly caught enough of the conversation to understand they were facing another media crisis. "We'll deal with it. Set up a press conference for tomorrow afternoon." "Claire, maybe we should consider postponing the custody hearing," Sarah suggested. "Let this blow over first." "No," Claire said firmly. "We're not hiding anymore. We're not postponing our legal rights because tabloids want to create drama." After hanging up, she turned to Daniel, who was staring out the window with an expression she recognized as his thinking face. "They're going to make me look like a gold digger," he said quietly. "A homeless man who manipulated a desperate woman for money and housing. Is that what you think you did?" "No, but I can see how it looks from the outside." Claire struggled to her feet, her pregnancy making quick movements more difficult. "Daniel, Look at me." He turned to face her, and she saw the same self-doubt that had plagued him during their first media storm. "In 3 months, we're going to have a daughter," she said. "She's going to grow up in a world where people have opinions about how she came to exist and whether her parents are suitable. We can spend our energy worrying about those opinions, or we can focus on being the best parents we can be. And if the court decides I'm not suitable, if they terminate my rights because of the media pressure, then we fight it. We appeal. We hire better lawyers. We don't give up." Daniel stood and placed his hands gently on Claire's belly, feeling their daughter move in response to his touch. The gesture had become natural over the past month, a physical reminder of their shared investment in this new life. "She's lucky to have you for a mother," he said. "She's lucky to have both of us." That evening, Claire called an emergency board meeting to address the media attention and its potential impact on the company. Several board members had expressed concern about her unconventional personal life affecting Voss Technologies' reputation. Those stock prices had actually risen slightly, as investors seemed intrigued rather than concerned. "The custody hearing is next week," Claire explained to the boardroom of executives and investors. "After that, the legal aspects of my personal situation will be resolved, and I expect media interest to diminish. And if it doesn't," asked Robert Chun, the board's most conservative member, "what if this continues to be a distraction? Then you'll have to decide whether my personal life outweighs 15 years of successful leadership," Claire said bluntly. "But I won't apologize for becoming a mother or for choosing an unconventional path to get there." The room was quiet for a moment before Margaret Willis, the board's senior member, spoke up. "Claire, speaking for myself, I find your commitment to both your professional responsibilities and your growing family admirable. This company has benefited from your willingness to take calculated risks. I see no reason to question that approach." Now, other board members nodded agreement, and Claire felt a wave of relief. Her professional life, at least, seemed secure despite the personal upheaval. Meanwhile, Daniel met with his own support system, Tommy, and several other friends from the Bridge community who'd followed his transformation with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "Professor, you sure you know what you're getting into?" Tommy asked as they sat in Daniel's current apartment, boxes packed for the move to Brooklyn Heights. "This lady's world is intense, man. All that money, all that attention. I know it's complicated," Daniel said. "But this isn't about her money or her world. It's about our child. And you really think you can be a good father? No offense, but 2 years ago, you could barely take care of yourself." The question hurt because Daniel had asked it himself dozens of times. "I think I can try to be. I think." That's what fathers do. They try to be better than they were for their children's sake. What if the kid grows up ashamed of having a homeless guy for a dad? Then I'll have to make sure that by the time she's old enough to understand, homeless isn't the most important thing about who I was. I'll have to make sure father is. As Daniel finished packing his few belongings, he found himself thinking about the baby growing inside Claire, their daughter, who would never know poverty or hunger, who would grow up with every advantage money could provide. But he hoped she would also inherit his appreciation for simple beauty, his understanding that dignity didn't depend on circumstances, and his knowledge that sometimes the most meaningful connections came from the most unexpected places. In 1 week, a judge would decide whether their unconventional family deserved legal recognition. But regardless of that outcome, Daniel knew that his life had been fundamentally changed by the decision to help Claire become a mother. He'd found purpose, hope, and a future worth building, not because of the money she'd paid him, but because of the trust she'd placed in him and the life they were creating together. The family court, building in downtown Manhattan, buzzed with more activity than usual for a custody hearing. News vans lined the street, and photographers clustered around the entrance, waiting for Claire and Daniel to arrive. Judge Patricia Reeves had denied media requests to film inside the courtroom, but that hadn't diminished public interest in the case. Claire arrived first, flanked by Marcus and 2 additional attorneys. He brought to handle the unprecedented legal questions their situation raised. She wore a conservative navy suit, her 7-month pregnancy visible but not emphasized, projecting the composed professionalism that had served her throughout her business career. Daniel entered through a side entrance, accompanied by his court-appointed lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, a family law specialist who'd volunteered to represent him pro bono after reading about the case. He'd chosen a simple gray suit, understanding that his appearance would be scrutinized by both the judge and the media. Inside the courtroom, Judge Reeves called the proceedings to order with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd seen every possible family configuration during her 20 years on the bench. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that suggested she wouldn't be swayed by celebrity or sentiment. "This is an unusual case," Judge Reeves began, "but the legal questions are straightforward. Mr. Reed is petitioning for joint legal and physical custody of a child he will father with Ms. Voss. The original contract between the parties attempted to waive his parental rights, but such waivers are not enforceable under New York law." Marcus stood to present Claire's position. "Your Honor, Ms. Voss supports Mr. Reed's petition for joint custody. While their arrangement began as a reproductive agreement, both parties now agree that shared parenting is in the child's best interests." The statement sent a murmur through the packed courtroom. Observers had expected a contentious custody battle, not a united front from both parents. Jennifer Walsh rose to address the court. "Your Honor, Mr. Reed seeks equal legal custody and substantial physical custody. He's prepared to demonstrate his fitness as a parent and his commitment to this child's welfare." Judge Reeves reviewed the documents before her, including psychological evaluations, financial assessments, and character references for both parties. "Ms. Voss, please approach the witness stand." Claire took the oath and settled into the witness chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite her racing heart. The next few minutes would determine not just legal custody, but the future structure of their unconventional family. "Ms. Voss," the judge began, "explain to the court how this arrangement began and why you now support joint custody." Claire had practiced this testimony, that sitting under oath before a judge who would determine her child's future made every word feel weighted with consequence. "Your Honor, I spent 15 years trying to conceive a child through traditional medical means. When those options were exhausted, I made an unconventional decision to seek a biological father outside the normal sperm donation process. I approached Mr. Reed not because I was seeking a co-parent, but because I was seeking someone whose character and values are respected." "And what changed your mind about co-parenting?" "Going through pregnancy together showed me that Mr. Reed wasn't just biologically contributing to this child. He was emotionally invested in her welfare. I realized that my desire to control every aspect of this process was less important than giving my daughter 2 parents who love her." Judge Reeves made notes, then asked, "Are you concerned about the significant economic disparity between you and Mr. Reed?" "No, Your Honor. Economic disparity doesn't determine parenting ability. Mr. Reed brings qualities to this relationship that aren't measured in dollars: compassion, resilience, and the ability to find meaning in difficult circumstances." "What about the media attention? How do you plan to protect this child from public scrutiny?" Claire glanced at Daniel, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We've learned that trying to hide or control public perception is less effective than living authentically and letting our actions speak for themselves. Our daughter will grow up knowing that her parents chose each other deliberately and fought for the right to raise her together." After Claire's testimony, Judge Reeves called Daniel to the stand. He walked to the witness chair with visible nervousness, but also determination. understanding that the next few minutes would determine whether he could legally claim the title of father. "Mr. Reed," Judge Reeves began, "you were homeless when you entered this arrangement. How do I know you're seeking custody for the right reasons?" Daniel had expected this question, but hearing it in the formal setting of a courtroom made his answer feel more crucial. "Your Honor, I was homeless, not heartless. I've experienced loss that nearly destroyed me, but that experience also taught me the value of family, of connection, of not taking relationships for granted. I'm seeking custody because I wanted to be a father to this child, not because I want access to Ms. Voss's wealth. What can you offer this child that justifies shared custody?" "I can offer her a perspective on life that values character over circumstances, beauty over luxury, and love over security. I can offer her a father who understands that the most important things in life can't be bought." Judge Reeves leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Reed, this child will grow up with every material advantage. Why should she need the perspective of someone who's experienced poverty and homelessness?" Daniel paused, considering how to articulate something he felt deeply, but had never put into words. "Because privilege without perspective creates entitlement, Your Honor. Because understanding struggle creates empathy. Because knowing that dignity doesn't depend on circumstances creates strength." He looked directly at the judge. "I want my daughter to understand that her worth isn't measured by what she has, but by who she chooses to be." The courtroom was completely silent as Daniel finished his testimony. Judge Reeves made final notes, then announced a brief recess before rendering her decision. During the 20-minute recess, Claire and Daniel found themselves in the courthouse hallway, surrounded by their legal teams, but essentially alone with their anxiety. Neither spoke about the possibility of losing Daniel potentially being denied parental rights, Claire potentially facing single parenthood despite her desire for a co-parent. "Whatever happens," Claire said quietly, "I want you to know that asking you to be part of this was the best decision I've made." Daniel took her hand, a gesture that felt natural despite their complex relationship. "And saying yes was the best decision I've made." When court reconvened, Judge Reeves took her seat with the deliberate gravity of someone about to make a decision that would affect a child's entire life. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with overflow spectators standing in the back, and reporters taking notes despite the ban on recording devices. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, Judge Reeves began, "I find that both Mr. Reed and Ms. Voss are fit parents who have demonstrated genuine commitment to this child's welfare. However, this case presents unique challenges that require careful consideration." Claire felt her heart racing as the judge continued. The original contract between these parties attempted to create a purely transactional relationship, but human reproduction is inherently relational. You cannot separate the biological from the emotional, the legal from the personal. This court recognizes that both parties have evolved beyond their original arrangement. Judge Reeves looked directly at Claire and Daniel. "Mr. Reed, your petition for joint legal custody is granted. This child will have two legal parents with equal rights to make decisions about her education, medical care, and welfare." A collective exhale swept through the courtroom, but the judge wasn't finished. "However, physical custody requires more consideration. Ms. Voss has greater financial resources and housing stability. Mr. Reed has overcome significant personal challenges, but remains in a period of rebuilding his life." Daniel's face showed the strain of waiting for a decision that would determine whether he could be a daily presence in his daughter's life or relegated to weekend visits. "Therefore," Judge Reeves continued, "I am granting primary physical custody to Ms. Voss, with substantial and meaningful time allocated to Mr. Reed. Specifically, Mr. Reed will have the child every Tuesday and Thursday overnight, alternating weekends and equal time during school holidays." Daniel closed his eyes, processing the reality that he would be a real father with real custody, not just a biological contributor with visiting privileges. Furthermore, the judge added, I understand both parties have expressed interest in an unconventional living arrangement that would allow the child to maintain close relationships with both parents. While this court cannot mandate such arrangements, I encourage any housing decisions that prioritize the child's emotional stability and access to both parents. Judge Reeves set down her papers and addressed the courtroom directly. This case has attracted significant media attention, much of it focused on the unusual circumstances of this child's conception. But family law is not concerned with convention. It is concerned with the best interests of children. This child will have two committed parents who chose each other deliberately and fought for the right to raise her together. She is fortunate. As the judge's gavel fell, officially establishing Daniel Reed and Claire Voss as legal co-parents, the courtroom erupted in quiet celebration from their supporters and furious note-taking from reporters outside the courthouse. Claire and Daniel faced a wall of cameras and shouted questions. Marcus had prepared a brief statement, but standing there with their custody order official, both felt compelled to speak from the heart. Today, the court recognized something we've learned over the past 9 months, Claire said, stepping up to the microphones. Family isn't defined by how it begins, but by the love and commitment that sustains it. Our daughter will grow up knowing that her parents chose each other deliberately and put her needs above conventional expectations. Daniel moved to stand beside her, no longer the nervous homeless man who'd been afraid to speak publicly. This case was never about money or publicity. It was about two people who wanted to create life and discovered that creating life creates family. We're grateful for the court's recognition of our commitment to our daughter and to each other as co-parents. Reporter called out, "Are you two planning to get married?" Claire and Daniel exchanged a look that contained months of shared experience, mutual respect, and careful boundaries. "We're planning to be the best parents we can be," Claire answered. "Marriage isn't necessary for successful co-parenting, but commitment to our child's welfare is essential." As they left the courthouse together, officially recognized as a legal family despite their unconventional origins, both felt the weight of responsibility and the lightness of relief. The hardest questions had been answered. They would raise their daughter together, sharing both the joys and challenges of parenthood. That evening, they stood in the nursery of their new house in Brooklyn Heights, assembling the crib that would soon hold their daughter. The task was meditative, requiring cooperation and patience, much like the partnership they'd built. "I keep thinking about what the judge said," Daniel remarked as he tightened the crib's bolts. "About family being defined by love and commitment, not convention." "Do you think we love each other?" Claire asked, then quickly clarified. "I mean, as co-parents, as family." Daniel considered the question seriously. "I think we love what we've created together. I think we love the possibility of giving our daughter something neither of us had: parents who chose each other for the right reasons." "What reasons are those?" "Respect, shared values, the belief that together we can give her more than either of us could alone." Claire tested the crib's stability, satisfied with their work. "That sounds like love to me. Maybe not romantic love, but something deeper. Partnership love," Daniel suggested. "Parent love." As they finished preparing their daughter's room, both understood that their relationship had become something unprecedented in their experience. A deliberately chosen family built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the kind of love that develops when two people commit to putting someone else's needs first. In 2 months, their daughter would be born into a family that defied easy categorization but offered something invaluable. Parents who had fought for the right to love her together. Emma Grace Reed Voss arrived 2 weeks early on a snowy February morning, her first cry filling the delivery room with the sound of new life and fulfilled dreams. Claire had labored for 14 hours, with Daniel holding her hand through contractions and encouraging her when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her determination. "She's perfect," Dr. Chun announced, placing the baby on Claire's chest. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, and very healthy. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he looked at his daughter for the first time, not through an ultrasound screen, but in person, alive and breathing and unmistakably real. Her tiny fingers grasped at the air, and when he offered his finger, she gripped it with surprising strength. "Hello, Emma," he whispered. "I'm your daddy." Claire watched Daniel's face transform with wonder and protective love, confirming what she'd known for months. Their arrangement had evolved into something far more meaningful than either had imagined. This man who'd been sleeping under a bridge a year ago was now cradling their daughter with the tenderness of someone who understood the preciousness of what could be lost. "She has your eyes," Claire said, noting the hazel color that already seemed to show Daniel's thoughtful expression. "And your determination," Daniel replied, watching Emma's fierce grip on his finger. "She knows what she wants." The first weeks of parenthood challenged both of them in ways they hadn't anticipated. Claire, accustomed to controlling every aspect of her environment, struggled with the unpredictability of infant care. Daniel, still adjusting to stable housing and regular income, worried constantly about whether he was adequately prepared for the responsibilities of fatherhood. But their unconventional living arrangement proved more successful than either had dared hope. Emma moved seamlessly between Claire's sophisticated nursery on the main floor and Daniel's cozy space upstairs, never having to choose between parents or adjust to dramatically different environments. The shared kitchen became the heart of their family life, where they took turns with 3 a.m. feedings and compared notes on Emma's development. "She smiled at me today," Daniel announced one morning, settling Emma into her high chair for breakfast. "A real smile, not just gas." "She's been smiling at me for days," Claire replied, pretending to be offended. "I think she's just more impressed by your singing." Daniel had resumed his musical practice, playing soft piano pieces on the upright piano they'd placed in the family room. Emma seemed mesmerized by the melodies, often falling asleep to her father's gentle playing. 6 months after Emma's birth, Claire returned to work part-time, confident that Daniel could provide excellent care during her absence. The media attention had largely subsided, replaced by genuine curiosity about their successful co-parenting arrangement. Voss Technologies had posted record profits, and Claire found that her unconventional personal life had actually enhanced her reputation as a leader willing to challenge conventions. Daniel had also returned to work, accepting a position teaching music at a local elementary school. His students and colleagues knew nothing of his homeless period, seeing only a dedicated teacher who brought unusual passion to his work. The stability of employment and parenthood had restored his confidence and sense of purpose. "I have something to tell you," Claire said one evening as they sat in the garden watching Emma explore the sandbox Daniel had built. "The board offered me a promotion. CEO of the entire Voss Group, not just the technology division." "That's incredible," Daniel said, genuinely excited for her achievement. "How do you feel about it? Proud, terrified, overwhelmed?" Claire paused, watching Emma stack blocks with intense concentration, and concerned about what it means for our arrangement. "What do you mean?" "It would require more travel, longer hours, additional responsibilities. I'd need to rely on you more for Emma's care." Daniel considered this development understanding, both the opportunity and the challenge it represented. "Are you asking if I'm prepared for that, or if I'm willing?" "Both, I suppose." "Claire, being Emma's father is the most important job I'll ever have. If your career advancement means I need to take on more parenting responsibilities, then that's what I'll do." The simple statement encapsulated the partnership they'd built: flexible, supportive, always prioritizing Emma's needs above their individual concerns. A year later, Claire accepted the promotion and began traveling regularly for work. Daniel's role as primary caregiver during her absences strengthened his bond with Emma and proved to both of them that their arrangement could adapt to changing circumstances. Emma's second birthday party was held in their shared garden, attended by colleagues from both parents' professional lives, neighbors who'd become friends, and a few members of Daniel's Bridge community who'd watched his transformation with amazement. Tommy Martinez, now housed and working steadily, served as Emma's honorary uncle, teaching her to play harmonica much to Claire's mock dismay. "Look at this family," Sarah Chun observed, watching Daniel push Emma on the swing while Claire organized party games. "Who would have predicted this outcome?" "Anyone who spent 5 minutes with them together," Marcus Fitzgerald replied. They were meant to be parents, just not in the way either expected. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Claire and Daniel cleaned up together while Emma napped in her father's arms. The routine was so natural now that they moved around each other with the easy familiarity of people who'd learned to share space and responsibilities without conflict. "Do you ever regret it?" Claire asked as they stored leftover birthday cake. "The way everything changed from our original plan?" Daniel looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully against his chest, her small hand curled around the fabric of his shirt. "Do you know what I regret?" "What?" "I regret that I spent 2 years thinking my life was over because I'd lost everything. I regret not believing that second chances were possible." Claire touched Emma's soft hair, marveling at how this tiny person had transformed both their lives so completely. "And now? Now I know that sometimes losing everything is how you discover what matters most." The house in Brooklyn Heights had become a home in ways neither had anticipated. The empty crib that had waited 15 years in Claire's penthouse was now in their shared attic, replaced by Emma's toddler bed and the scattered toys of a happy childhood. The music book Daniel had carried under the bridge sat on the piano, its pages now familiar to a little girl who requested Daddy's songs every bedtime. Their family defied conventional categories, but offered something invaluable proof that love can be chosen, that family can be built deliberately, and that sometimes the most meaningful connections arise from the most unexpected circumstances. As Claire watched Daniel tuck Emma into her crib and whisper goodnight promises about tomorrow's adventures, she realized that her desperate desire for a child had led her to something she'd never thought to want: a partner in the most important work of her life, chosen not for romance but for character, not for passion but for purpose. Emma Grace Reed Voss would grow up knowing that her parents had fought for the right to love her together. That family wasn't about how it began, but about the commitment that sustained it, and that sometimes the most beautiful things in life came from the most unconventional choices. The empty crib had been filled, but more than that, 2 hearts that had known profound loss have been filled with hope, purpose, and the kind of love that develops when people choose each other for all the right reasons.